Let's start with the exact second the room shifted, when your old pattern met a new variable. Family dinners can be polite traps, everyone smiling, nobody naming the thing that's rotting underneath. So tell me what happened at that birthday table, the moment you felt your silence lose its grip.
Delara's face went white the second she saw who came in with me. For years, she treated my dating life like a scoreboard. Every man I introduced became something she needed to take, then toss aside. I quit bringing anyone home. I quit telling my family anything real. So when my dad, Thorne Whitlock, invited me to my stepmother Isadora Vexley's birthday dinner, dread rose in my throat until I chose a new move. I brought my boss, Anouk Carawell, married, older, and supposedly immune to Delara's games. Delara whispered Anouk's name like a curse. Anouk offered a professional handshake. Delara didn't take it. She said, "You interviewed me." The room tightened, and my old silence wasn't going to survive the night.
Before we get to the fallout, I want the origin story because patterns don't appear, they're cultivated. Blended families are sold as fresh starts, but sometimes they're just a new stage for old control. What was it like the first days Delara became your stepsister? What did you notice that you ignored at the time?
I was 16, and she was 18, old enough to carry herself like she owned every room. Thorne met Isadora at a corporate retreat in Redfern Summit, and 6 months later, we were living in Foxridge Hollow like it was destiny instead of whiplash. I tried to be kind, the way you are when you want peace more than truth. The first week, I offered to show Delara the places that made the town feel like mine. Thistle and Pike Cafe, my walking trail, a couple friends from school. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "That's sweet," she said, "but I'm good at making my own friends." It sounded polite. It felt like a warning. Isadora watched us with certainty, like she'd decided how this house would run. I told myself blended families just needed time. I didn't realize time was her weapon.
Here's what's chilling. The first violation is always small, so you doubt yourself, and doubting becomes the cage. Tell me the first time you saw Delara aim at someone near you. What did she do, and what did the adults do that taught you to swallow it?
3 months after they moved in, I brought over a boy from chemistry class, Caius Lawn. We weren't dating, we were doing a project, and I wanted one normal evening. Delara came downstairs in shorts so tiny they felt like a dare. She planted herself between us on the couch and started asking questions that weren't about school, girlfriend, preferences, what kind of girl he liked, then looked right at me when she said them. He blushed. She touched his arm, laughed too loudly, leaned too close. Thorne and Isadora stayed in the kitchen, smiling like nothing was wrong. I froze, because making a scene felt like handing her the spotlight. Caius never texted me again. At school, he switched groups, avoided my eyes, and I told myself it was coincidence. That lie tasted metallic, but I swallowed it anyway.
After the first hit, most people bargain with reality. Maybe I misread it. But patterns repeat because they're rewarded. When you brought home someone you truly liked, how did Delara escalate? And what did it do to your belief that love could be safe?
In college, I worked shifts at Thistle and Pike Cafe, and Arden Wetcliffe became my regular. Black coffee, smile, easy conversation. When we went out, it felt steady and real. I waited before bringing him to dinner because part of me still hoped the Caius thing was a fluke. Delara showed up in a tight black dress, as if our table was a nightclub. She leaned forward the whole meal, asking Arden about his job, his history, his type, redirecting him whenever I spoke. "Zinnia never mentioned how funny you are," she said, like I was an unreliable narrator. Thorne and Isadora smiled, as if this was harmless. Arden asked for Delara's number before he left. She gave it to him, right in front of me. Later, her phone lit up with his name. She didn't hide it. That's when denial died.
4 years is long enough to rewire a person. The cruelest part isn't just losing men, it's losing the part of you that trusts your own perception. How long did her pattern go on, and what did it do to the way you read people?
It went on for 4 years, long enough to change me. There was Calix Morrow from economics, who studied with me every Tuesday until Delara cornered him at a barbecue and posted a photo like she'd claimed him. There was Ivo Halstead, who loved books, until Delara performed borrowed quotes and got invited into his circle. There was Tavian Merrow, my volunteer partner, until Delara turned my dad's birthday dinner into her stage and showed up at our next build like she belonged. Every time she succeeded, she lost interest. She didn't want the men, she wanted the proof. One of them apologized months later, shame on his face, and it still didn't fix the damage. I stopped trusting their intentions, and I stopped trusting my instincts. Delara didn't just take attention. She took my belief in honest choosing.
When someone keeps taking from you, hiding starts to feel like strategy until you realize it's just shrinking. Did you try to protect yourself by disappearing your personal life from that house? And who was the first person to name what was really happening?
Yes. After enough humiliations, secrecy started to feel like control. I stopped mentioning dates at dinner. I stopped bringing anyone to Foxridge Hollow. I built a wall between my life and that house, like I could keep Delara out by keeping myself small. My best friend, Bryony Kestrel, noticed first. One night she cornered me after I cancelled plans again and asked what was going on. When I shrugged, she said, "It's Delara, isn't it?" The fact she knew made my stomach drop. Bryony told me everyone who knew Delara knew the pattern. She'd done it to her cousin at a wedding. I felt foolish for thinking my silence was noble. But I was terrified of being the daughter who ruined Thorne's happiness with Isadora. So I kept quiet, and the quiet became a habit that started to suffocate me.
Sometimes the rescue isn't a romance. It's a mentor who reteaches you standards. When you've lived under sabotage, you forget what normal respect feels like. Who entered your life next that helped you see yourself differently, and why did it matter?
Anouk Carawell did. I landed my first real job at Halcyon and Wren Atelier, and she was my boss. Sharp, relentless, the kind of leader who doesn't soften expectations to spare feelings. On my first day, she told me she hired my portfolio, not my promise, and that I'd have to work harder than I ever had. The first months were brutal. She tore apart drafts, pushed deadlines, and made me redo work until it stopped looking like trying and started looking like true. Then one night, after I rebuilt a campaign until sunrise, she finally nodded and said, "This is the level I need from you." I almost cried at my desk. After that, she began to mentor me. Client dinners, bigger projects, real responsibility. For the first time in years, I felt chosen for something I'd built, not something I'd hidden.
Pressure has a way of stripping people down to what's real. And in those late night trenches, the conversations you didn't plan show up anyway. What pressure brought you and Anouk close enough for deeper truth, not just work talk?
About 8 months in, Anouk pulled me into her office and told me she was building the team for Blackridge Holdings, our biggest pitch of the year. If we won, it meant stability for the whole firm. I said yes before fear could speak. The next 2 months were trenches. Long days, weekends, midnight messages, coffee at dawn. Exhaustion strips you down to what's real. One late night, Anouk started talking about her marriage to Callan. She said they'd nearly split after years of work stress and resentment. She admitted there had been someone at Callan's workplace who made him feel seen, and that temptation scared them awake. Therapy helped, but only after honesty burned like antiseptic. I listened and thought about Delara, about people who never build, only take. I didn't plan to tell Anouk my family story, but the words rose anyway, like confession-seeking air.
And that's the chess move. You don't fight her on her preferred battlefield. You change the rules. How did the invitation happen, and what were you expecting that night? Petty sabotage or something darker?
Isadora announced her birthday dinner like it was a performance. A formal reservation, dress code implied. Thorn called and said he wanted me there, like attendance could erase the distance I'd built. I almost declined. Then I heard Anouk's advice: live out loud. So I asked if I could bring a guest. There was a pause, the kind that carries judgment. Thorn said yes, and I could hear Isadora in the background saying, "Of course." I told Anouk she didn't have to come, and she agreed immediately, like strategy was comfort for her. I spent the afternoon choosing a dress that didn't look like a challenge, promising myself I wouldn't flinch at Delara's jokes. I expected petty sabotage, flirting, teasing, a public comparison. I did not expect recognition. I didn't expect my boss to be the one person in Delara's world she already feared.
Walk me through those first minutes, because sometimes nothing happens and yet everything changes. The smallest sentence can detonate a whole family myth. What did the room feel like when you arrived with Anouk?
The restaurant was warm and expensive, all polished wood and quiet confidence. Delara was already there, laughing too brightly at something Isadora said, as if they were best friends instead of new family. When I walked in with Anouk, the table paused for half a beat. Thorn stood, surprised but pleased. He respected titles. Isadora's smile held, practiced. Delara's smile faltered, then vanished. She stared at Anouk like she'd seen a ghost with good posture. Anouk introduced herself with calm professionalism and offered her hand. Delara didn't take it. She looked at me instead, eyes sharp, trying to locate the trick. Then she said Anouk's full name, soft and stunned. Anouk blinked. "Have we met?" Delara swallowed and answered, "You interviewed me." Nothing else happened in that instant. No shouting, no drama, just a tightening, like the air decided it belonged to a different story now.
The bathroom hallway confessional is such a classic, where masks come off because no one's watching. Did Delara confront you privately, and what did she reveal that showed this wasn't about jealousy, it was about control?
She did. Halfway through the meal, she brushed past me on the way to the restroom and murmured, "We need to talk." I followed. In the hallway mirror, her expression wasn't smug, it was raw. "You brought her on purpose," she hissed. "You wanted to humiliate me." I told her I didn't even know they'd met. She laughed like that was naive. "Anouk Carawell," she said, tasting the name. She looked at me like I was dirt. I asked what happened in the interview, and Delara's jaw clenched. She said Anouk judged her in 30 minutes and called it professionalism. Then her eyes narrowed. "You know what's funny?" she added. "She thinks she's untouchable. Everyone has a weakness." For the first time, I saw the hunger underneath her games. It wasn't about me. It was about control.
When a predator gets labeled, they hate it, not because it's unfair, but because it's accurate. After dessert, you stepped out with Anouk. What did she tell you about that interview that changed Delara from mean to dangerous?
After dessert, Anouk asked if I wanted fresh air. We stepped outside. I asked her what happened with Delara. Anouk stayed clinical. Delara arrived late, blamed traffic, then tried to turn the interview into an audition. She asked about Anouk's marriage, about Callan, about whether men stay loyal. She mentioned seeing Callan at an Ironvale Capital event and said he seemed lonely. When Anouk redirected back to the role, Delara laughed and said she preferred working with people who understand chemistry. Anouk told her no. Delara slid a note across the table anyway, her number and an email address. The last line ended it. "If your husband ever needs someone who appreciates him, tell him I'm discreet." Anouk looked at me and said, "That's not flirting. That's predatory." I couldn't argue. I only felt the floor inside me drop.
That moment when the lights come on is brutal because it doesn't only expose them, it exposes how long you normalized it. What memories clicked into place for you once Anouk said predatory, and how did it change the way you saw Isadora too?
It was like someone turned up the lights on old moments I'd filed as awkward. Delara's late-night calls. Her jokes about older men who know what they want. Once I walked past the living room and heard her tell Isadora, "He's not happy, you can tell." And Isadora answered, "Patience is an art." I'd assumed it was gossip. Now it sounded like rehearsal. Delara wasn't jealous of me. She was competitive with loyalty. She didn't chase affection, she chased leverage. Every time I swallowed humiliation at the table, I learned to normalize boundary breaking. So when Anouk called Delara predatory, it felt both shocking and obvious, like truth had been shouting while I labeled it noise. I went back inside and looked at Delara differently. I wasn't afraid of losing a man to her anymore. I was afraid of what she'd do to get control.
Here's the pivot. Feelings become evidence. And once you start asking questions, you can't unask them. That night, who did you call? And what question finally broke through your years of don't rock the boat?
I called my mother, Alice Halberg, after I got home. We don't talk much, but I needed a voice before Isadora and Delara. I asked if she knew anything about Isadora Vexley, where she came from, who she'd been before she became Thorne's wife. There was a pause. Alice asked why I was calling now. I told her Delara had tried to bait my boss's husband and that Isadora's calmness felt like complicity. Alice exhaled and said, "I hoped you'd never have to ask me that." She told me Thorne's relationship with Isadora didn't start where he claimed. There were gaps, months that didn't add up. Then she admitted she'd hired someone to check what she suspected. When I asked if she had the results, her voice tightened. "I do," she said. In that moment, my family history stopped being a feeling and became a file.
A file changes everything because it removes maybe. It's no longer a vibe, it's a timeline. What did that report contain, and which detail made your body go cold because it looked less like romance and more like coordination?
Alice sent it the next morning with the subject line, "For your eyes only." The investigator was Tavish Rook. There were dates, screenshots, and a timeline. The worst part was the photos. One showed Thorne and Isadora together months before he claimed they met, his hand on her back like it belonged there. Another showed Isadora meeting a man with Delara's sharp profile in Foxridge Hollow, passing an envelope, both of them checking over their shoulders. Tavish couldn't identify him, but he noted Delara used the last name Sloan long before the wedding. The report also listed money transfers from Thorne's business account to a consulting firm tied to Isadora. In ink, it didn't look like romance. It looked like coordination. I stared at the images until my hands went numb. I wasn't just dealing with a cruel stepsister. I was dealing with a plotted life.
When you bring receipts to a woman like Anouk, she doesn't panic, she builds a plan. You shared the report with her, and she made a connection that raised the stakes beyond family. What did she recognize, and why did it matter?
I brought the report to the office and asked Anouk for privacy. Her expression changed the moment she saw Isadora's name. Anouk told me that years earlier, at an Ironvale Capital weekend in Redfern Summit, a woman approached Callan with calm, practiced intimacy. Anouk hadn't known her name then, only the feeling it was rehearsed. Now, seeing Isadora's photo, she said, "That's her." She called Callan and asked if he remembered. Callan went quiet, then admitted the woman later emailed him from an address he never answered. Anouk's jaw tightened. "This isn't just family drama," she said. "It's a pattern." She told me we needed to verify the report before confronting anyone, confirm timelines, trace the consulting firm, find a witness who wasn't tied to my family. Watching her build a plan, I realized how long I'd been trained to confuse silence with peace.
Verification is where fear turns into power because truth that's documented doesn't need permission. What was your first step to confirm the story, and what did you uncover fast that made Delara's old name feel like a key?
We started with what couldn't argue: records and money trails. Within hours, Anouk pulled the consulting firm's filings. Vexley Strategic Advisory was registered to a mailbox suite. No staff, no portfolio, just a clean name. The only thing real was the flow of money. Transfers from Thorne's business account matched Tavish's dates, weeks before the official relationship, then bigger amounts after the wedding. Anouk compared those dates to Delara's posts. Delara had been in Crown Ridge on one of the same weekends, smiling online like nothing was happening. Then Anouk found an archived gala photo from Redfern Summit. Isadora in the background, arm linked with a man who wasn't Thorne. The caption named him Huxley Sloane. Delara's old last name wasn't random. It was a key, and for the first time, fear turned into anger.
Documents are strong, but a witness makes it undeniable. And sometimes the world has been waiting for someone to finally ask the right question. Who did you find who could confirm Isadora's past without being tied to your family, and what did she say?
Anouk said we needed a human voice, not just documents. She found an operations lead at Iron Vale Capital, Sibella Greaves. We called her, expecting resistance. Instead, Sibella paused and asked, "Is this about Isadora Vexley?" My stomach dropped. Sibella said she remembered Isadora from before the marriage. She hovered at events, she told us, never officially invited, but never turned away. She described Isadora as someone who collected people like leverage. Then she mentioned Delara without prompting. Sibella said Delara used to show up with Huxley Sloane and call him her father, even after the new marriage. She offered to forward old emails and guest lists where Isadora's name appeared alongside Sloane's. Her voice wasn't dramatic, it was tired, like she'd watched the same play too many times. When the email arrived, proof stopped being a suspicion. It became a stack of receipts.
Now we're at the confrontation point, the moment many people avoid because it risks collapse, but collapse is sometimes the only honest door out. How did you confront Thorne with everything, and what shocked you about his reaction?
I asked Thorne to meet me at my apartment in Marrowgate, not the family house. I needed neutral ground. He arrived smiling, like we were repairing something simple. I handed him a folder: Tavish Rook's report, the bank transfers, the gala photo, Sibella's emails. Thorne skimmed at first, like speed could outrun consequence. Then his hands slowed, his face drained. He laughed sharply and said, "This can't be real." I pointed to the dates that proved he met Isadora before he claimed, and to Huxley Sloane's name. Thorne stared at the pages like they could bite. Then he whispered, "I thought I was saving us." His eyes filled, not with rage but with panic, like a man realizing he'd been managed. I expected a fight. What I got was collapse. And collapse terrified me, because the next move belongs to who stays standing.
That aftermath silence is its own kind of torture because your brain tries to relitigate reality when the other person goes quiet. After you handed Thorne the folder, what happened in the days that followed, and what did you do to keep yourself from spiraling?
He left my apartment holding the evidence like it could burn him, then went silent for 3 days. No calls, no texts, no denial. The quiet made me doubt myself, so I buried my mind in work. Blackridge Holdings was a week away, and the deck still needed polish. Anouk noticed I was bracing for impact. I told her my dad had the file, and I didn't know what he'd choose. She said patterns can't be unseen, but grief makes people stall. On the 4th day, Thorne called and asked me to come to Foxridge Hollow. His voice sounded older. He said Isadora and Delara were there, the folder was on the table, and he needed us all in one room. I heard a trap and went anyway. because running had never saved me. Not once.
When you walk into a family meeting, it's rarely about truth, it's about controlling the verdict. I want the temperature of that room. Who sat where, who performed calm, who sharpened blame, and who looked like they might break. What did it feel like?
Like a stage dressed to control the verdict. Isadora sat centered on the couch, hands folded, expression smooth. Delara hovered behind her, eyes bright with accusation. Thorn stood by the fireplace instead of sitting, as if he needed his legs locked. The folder lay open on the coffee table, pages exposed like a wound. Isadora looked at me with resignation, more than rage, as if deciding I was the enemy was useful. Delara said I was jealous and wanted to ruin their real family. I said I wanted Thorn to see who he'd married. Anouk stayed near the doorway, calm, not dominating the room, just refusing to be moved. Thorn asked for honesty, when they met, why the timeline changed, and what happened with Callan Carawell. No one laughed. Even the air felt held, waiting for someone to flinch.
The first confession is usually packaged as context because manipulators love to reframe harm as inevitability. What was the first truth Isadora admitted once Thorn pressed her, and how did she try to turn it back on him?
She admitted the official story was a lie. She met Thorn in January at a Redfern Summit hotel bar, months before the timeline he'd told everyone. She said he was unhappy, that he complained about his marriage to Alice, and she spoke like that made her blameless. Then she turned it back on him. "Don't act like you were a victim," she said. "You wanted out long before I showed up." Her voice was steady, practiced, like she'd rehearsed this defense for years. Thorn's face tightened because that part was true. She called it streamlining the timeline, as if rewriting reality was a kindness. I watched my father absorb the first crack. Not that he'd been lonely, but that she'd managed the story from the start. Delara's mouth curved like she admired the technique, and I finally understood who taught her and why she never looked guilty.
It's one thing to lie about a love story, it's another to treat people like test subjects. I tried him, he didn't work, so I moved on. Did Isadora address what happened with Callan at Ironvale Capital, and what did her tone reveal?
Yes, and her casual tone made it worse. Thorn asked about Callan Carawell, and Isadora didn't deny she'd been around Ironvale Capital. She said Callan was before Thorn, like people were entries in a calendar. She admitted she tested whether he'd leave Anouk, then shrugged and said he wouldn't, so she moved on. When Thorn asked how many others there were, she smiled and said, "Does it matter? You got your divorce." Thorn asked quietly, "So I was the one who said yes?" And she didn't answer. That silence was louder than confession. Isadora wasn't apologizing, she was negotiating. She said stability is the real prize and everyone uses everyone. I cut in and said, love isn't a heist. Delara snapped that I didn't understand how the world works. Anouk's warning echoed, predatory isn't a vibe, it's a pattern, and patterns don't stop because you beg.
Then the spotlight turns to Delara, and this is where cruelty loves to cosplay as honesty. She didn't deny harm, she bragged about it. What did Delara say when the conversation shifted to her behavior, and what did it expose?
Delara acted like my pain was irrelevant. She said the men I brought home were weak, and she simply exposed it faster. When I called it stealing, she lifted her chin and said, "Because I could." Then she added, "Because they wanted me more." Like attention was a trophy. I reminded her she never kept anyone. Denton, Corbin, the others. She just wanted the moment I lost. Her smile twitched, like I'd touched the real nerve. Thorn shouted for us to stop and asked Delara what mattered. "Did you cross a line with Anouk in that interview?" Delara laughed and said, "Anouk was arrogant that marriages don't recover, and everyone is looking for an exit." Anouk didn't raise her voice. She said, You tried to recruit my husband like he was a lead. Delara's eyes flicked, and I knew she recognized herself in that sentence.
Here comes the moment that decides the next decade. Does a parent pick comfort or integrity? And when they finally choose integrity, it still feels like grief, not triumph. What decision did Thorn make, and how did Isadora try to keep control?
Thorn turned to Isadora and said, I need you to leave tonight. Not a negotiation, an order. Isadora tried to minimize it, calling it ancient history and saying he was embarrassing himself. When that failed, she went for fear. He'd be lonely, he'd regret it, he'd come crawling back when the house felt empty. Thorn answered, I'd rather be lonely than be lied to. For a second, no one moved. Even Delara looked surprised that he chose reality over comfort. Isadora's smile flattened. She told Delara to pack. Delara glared at me like I'd stolen something. They left with overnight bags and pride, and the door closing sounded less like victory than mourning. Thorn sat down as if his bones had finally caught up to the truth, and I realized he was grieving the fantasy, not just the woman.
After the door closes, the real conversation begins. No audience, no performance, and sometimes the hardest thing is watching a parent realize they helped build the trap they're now escaping. What was the conversation like between you and Thorn?
We sat with the lights low, like we were afraid to look directly at what happened. I apologized on instinct because I'd spent years believing truth breaks families. Thorn said I did the right thing. He admitted he'd been unhappy in his marriage to Airless, but said he handled it like a coward. He wanted an exit more than an honest ending, and he let someone else write the story. He stared at the folder and said he didn't know how to face Airless with what he'd done. I told him accountability starts with a call, not a speech. I asked if he would divorce Isadora. He said he didn't know yet, but he couldn't pretend the marriage felt real anymore. Then he whispered, I can't remember a single moment that wasn't a performance. I stayed, because sometimes being a daughter means holding the mirror steady.
Life doesn't pause for heartbreak, especially when your career is on the line. The pitch shows up like weather. What happened with the Blackridge Holdings pitch while your family was unraveling, and what did that win mean?
The pitch arrived like weather, unstoppable, indifferent. Anouk and I walked into the boardroom carrying months of work and a week of chaos. I expected my voice to crack, but focus took over. Slides don't flirt. Executives don't care who betrayed you. We delivered the strategy cleanly and answered hard questions without blinking. When we stepped out, my knees remembered they could tremble. 2 days later, Blackridge called. We won. The account meant security for Halcyon and Wren Atelier and momentum for my career. At the celebration dinner, Anouk toasted the team, then pulled me aside. She said she was proud of me, not just for the work, but for turning on the lights at home. I said it felt like I blew up my family. She said, you exposed what was already leaking. For the first time, I believed her, and the win felt like breath.
When the divorce starts, manipulators don't suddenly become romantic. They become contractual, they fight for money, narrative, and image. How did Isadora respond once Thorn moved toward divorce, and what happened when her story met legal daylight?
A month later, Thorn filed, and Isadora responded like a negotiator, not a grieving wife. She wanted alimony, half the assets, and the narrative that she'd been wronged. She told everyone Thorn was confused and that I'd manipulated him with paperwork. Thorn's attorney laid out the timeline, the January meeting, the overlaps with Iron Vale Capital, the transfers to Vexley Strategic Advisory, and the investigators' dates that contradicted every official detail. Isadora's confidence shifted when she realized a courtroom would force her story into plain language. She settled quickly because patterns don't look romantic under oath. Isadora and Delara moved to Marrowgate, North Carolina, and left behind polite explanations. Months later, I heard Delara lasted 3 months at a startup before HR walked her out. It didn't feel like victory. It felt like gravity finally acting on a lie.
I want to pause here because it's rare to see a family choose accountability over denial. It doesn't fix everything, but it changes the future. How did your relationship with Erlis shift once the truth was out in the open?
It became adult, honest, imperfect, present. Ellis apologized for not warning me sooner, for letting her suspicion fade because she didn't want to poison my childhood. I told her she did what she could, and the truth surfaced when it could survive daylight. We started meeting for coffee without performing cheerfulness. We talked about boundaries and how silence gets mistaken for peace. Thorn didn't ask for forgiveness in speeches. He started showing up differently, more direct, less defensive, willing to name his harm. The three of us met once at Thistle and Pike Cafe. It was awkward, then calm. They didn't get back together, but they learned to be civil, kind. I watched them talk about me without fighting, and it felt like time rewinding into something gentler. We didn't become a fixed family. We became a real one, messy, accountable, and no longer pretending.
In the middle of chaos, the nervous system often mistakes safety for danger because safety is unfamiliar. Then someone steady shows up and you almost don't trust it. When did Stellan enter your life, and what felt different about him?
I met Stellan Rourke at a friend's wedding. He was a high school teacher with steady eyes and warmth that didn't ask for applause. We talked about ordinary things, students, books, the bravery of showing up, and I felt my shoulders drop. Dating him scared me because it felt safe. I kept waiting for an angle, for the moment he'd perform for my family or chase Delara's attention. He didn't. He asked questions and listened. On our 4th date, I introduced him to Thorn because I refused to hide anymore. They talked baseball and volunteering, then drifted into the kind of conversation men have when they're trying to be decent. When we left, Thorn hugged me and said, "He seems genuine." I cried in the car, relief more than joy. Stellan didn't compete. He chose, calmly, and that steadiness made me brave enough to believe again.
The return message always comes when you're finally stable, like chaos trying to reopen the door. Did Delara ever try to come back into your life? And what did choosing a boundary feel like in your body?
Yes, through LinkedIn. A message popped up like nothing happened. She'd be in town for a conference and wanted to catch up. I stared at it, surprised by my own hesitation. Curiosity dressed itself as hope. Then I remembered her face in that living room, the way she said, "because I could," and the way she treated Anouk like prey. I showed the message to Stellan and asked if blocking her was harsh. He said, "That's healthy. Some people don't deserve another chance to hurt you." So I blocked Delara, and the relief was immediate, like closing a door I'd been holding open with my own hands. I didn't reply. I didn't explain. It wasn't revenge, it was refusal. For the first time, my boundary felt solid, not temporary, and I didn't miss the chaos.
And then Isadora, because the architect hates being seen, she wanted guilt to restore her image. Did she reach out to, and how did you keep old conditioning from pulling you back into apology?
She did, late at night, from an unknown number. She said I destroyed her family, that she and Delara had to start over, that Thorn took everything, and I should be ashamed. Old me would have swallowed guilt, but I wasn't that version anymore. I replied once, "You destroyed your own family. I just showed everyone who you really are. Good luck." Then I blocked her. I didn't let myself reread it, because rereading is how guilt sneaks back in. Stellan asked what happened. I told him, and he said, "Good. You have nothing to feel guilty about." That sentence landed hard, because guilt had been my leash for years. Isadora wanted my remorse to rewrite her image. I refused. Blocking her didn't erase the damage, but it stopped the bleeding. And that was the first peace I didn't have to earn with silence.
First holidays after the storm are always strange, like you're living in a house that finally tells the truth and you're not sure you're allowed to relax. What did the first holidays look like once Isadora and Delara were gone?
Strange at first, like we were trespassing in a family we weren't sure we deserved. Thorn invited me and Stellan for Christmas, and Airless came too. We moved carefully until food made us human. We cooked, laughed, and told stories without curating them for appearances. Airless teased me about childhood disasters. Thorn pulled out photos and watched Stellan react with real interest. Stellan said, "Your daughter is remarkable," and my parents shared a quiet smile that didn't ask anything from me. Later, we exchanged small gifts that felt like peace offerings, not obligations. After everyone left, I cried alone. Relief, tears. I didn't get the blended family fantasy I chased. I got honesty. It was late, messy, and imperfect, but real. And in that reality, I could finally breathe without performing, because no one was pretending love could be built on lies.
Pain turns into purpose when you refuse to romanticize it. You started leading more at work, then someone came to you with the same pattern you survived. What changed at work for you after the Blackridge win and the family fallout?
Work got bigger, but I got steadier. Anouk put me in charge of more accounts and treated me like a leader. I built a small team and learned mentorship is accountability in motion. One afternoon, Leora Fenwick, a junior hire, came in with red eyes and said her sister kept stealing her boyfriends. She was terrified of breaking her family if she spoke up. I told her my story as a map. Patterns survive on silence, and consequences start the moment you stop protecting the behavior. I said truth isn't what breaks families. Lies do. Leora left calmer, not because it was solved, but because she finally had language. That day, I realized pain becomes purpose when you turn it into clarity for someone else, and you stop calling abuse drama or call it love.
Proposal after betrayal hits different. It's not fantasy, it's consent with eyes open. When Stellan proposed, what did that moment mean after everything you'd survived, and what did it rewrite in you?
It meant my body finally understood safety. Stellan proposed on a hike, no spotlight, just wind and a wide valley. He didn't talk about fate, he talked about choice, building, showing up, choosing each other when choosing is hard. I said yes before he finished, because his words matched his life. Planning the wedding felt like healing. Airless and Thorn both wanted to be there, and neither tried to compete for the role. Anouk agreed to stand beside me, not as a savior, but as the person who taught me standards. For years, Delara made relationships feel like a contest. Stellan made them feel like a home. That contrast rewired what I believed I deserved. My yes wasn't just to him. It was to a future where love isn't a performance, and my boundaries don't need an apology.
Curiosity is human, but it can also be a trap. Checking on the person who hurt you just to see if karma showed up. Did you ever look at Delara's life afterward, and what did you learn about takers long term?
Once I clicked Delara's profile after seeing her name on a mutual post. She looked older, harder, like her charm had turned into armor. Her job history was restless. 4 roles in 2 years, each ending quickly, each framed as moving on to better. I felt a flicker of pity. Stellan saw the screen and asked if I was checking up on her. I said I was curious. He told me he chose me because I'm genuine, not because I perform. I kissed him because he understood the point I'd missed for years. Love is consent and intention, not conquest. Delara's life looked like constant resets. Mine looked built. I closed the tab and exhaled once. That's when I stopped asking if she would change. Some questions aren't meant to be answered. They're meant to be released.
This next part matters. Accountability can be contagious. When someone finally admits they were fooled, they start choosing differently, but carefully. What happened when Thorn asked to bring someone new into your world?
Thorn asked if my wedding invitation could include a +1. He sounded cautious, like trust had to be earned in installments. He said he'd been seeing Evadan Marlowe and wanted me to meet her before the wedding, to make sure. I heard the old fear behind his words. He didn't want another Isadora. I met Evadne the next week. She was warm without trying too hard, funny without competing, and respectful in the way she asked questions. She listened when I spoke, and she didn't use private moments to bond against Thorn. After dinner, I told Thorn she seemed genuine. He looked relieved and said he was taking it slow this time. That night, I realized accountability can be contagious. Thorn wasn't asking me to accept a replacement. He was asking me to witness his effort to choose better, with his eyes open.
I want you to name the distinction clearly because it's the antidote to years of confusion. What lesson did you take from the difference between takers and builders? And what would you tell someone still trapped in keeping the peace?
Takers don't need a reason. They need an opening. Isadora and Delara treated attention like currency and loyalty, like something you bargained for. They chased leverage, then acted shocked when people called it harm. For years, I tried to survive by hiding, keeping my life small so there was less to steal. That wasn't protection. It was surrender. Builders do the opposite. Builders bring things into the light. We invest, we show up, we choose people who choose back. Anouk taught me standards. Erlis taught me honesty without bitterness. Thorn taught me accountability can arrive late and still matter. Stellan taught me steadiness is devotion. The practical lesson is simple. Stop rewarding the pattern with silence. Truth hurts, but it heals faster than denial. And when someone proves they only know how to take, believe them the first time.
End this with a sentence that doesn't just summarize, it arms people because someone listening is still calling their silence maturity, still calling manipulation family, still blaming themselves for someone else's appetite. What do you want them to remember?
Truth isn't what destroys families. Lies do, and silence only makes the collapse slower. When I think of that dinner, I don't picture the menu. I picture Delara's face when the lights turned on, and Thorn choosing integrity over comfort. I didn't win a fight. I reclaimed my life. I stopped hiding love like it was weakness. I let mentorship raise my standards, and I let steadiness teach me safety. Isadora and Delara moved on to new rooms to conquer, but I stayed and built something they couldn't touch. If you're trapped in a pattern that keeps hurting you, stop calling it peace and call it permission. Turn on the lights, set the boundary, and let consequences do their job, fully. Watch more stories and support broken relationship tales.
Thank you for listening, because stories like Zinnia's aren't just drama, they're diagnostics. If a pattern keeps repeating, it's not bad luck, it's an opening someone keeps exploiting. If this episode gave you language for what you've lived, like, comment, and follow broken relationship tales. And if you're in a family dynamic that survives on your silence, turn on the lights, set one boundary, and let reality do the rest.